No, she's not impressed. Are you, cat?
Okay, kind of moved along a little bit. Did a couple of things, and I'm going to make a couple of comments as this is sort of a part 2 addendum. I lowered this section of the transfer port to pretty much the same height as that rib on the inside. But I've also, based on what we saw in our timing, I've altered the top of the transfers to get to a blowdown that I'm more comfortable with. So those transfers are actually quite a bit larger. Of course, the other thing is altered the lower edge of that intake, again in line with what we were seeing. So here's the cylinder kind of roughed out. You know, it takes me about an hour to get to this point. And, you know, you can make it look pretty. It gets to a point of diminishing returns, I suppose. So this cylinder here, if I've done my job properly, is going to have the transfer ports open a little sooner. So the blowdown is going to be in the low 20s. The intake port is going to open sooner. And I'm looking for intake timing to have that skirt clear that bottom edge of that intake port somewhere in the high 70s degrees before top dead center, like maybe 78. And we'll see. This was a cylinder that was seized, so I cleaned it up with just standard emery cloth, so I have to clean it real good. I'm hoping, as is, I'm hoping this will stick with, if not beat, Fugly Saw. Now, since a lot of this is being done by hand, one of the things you can do to check your work is put a ring in here. Just stick a ring right in there. And then use a piston to push it down. And then check. Did I raise that evenly on both sides? Well, you push that piston ring right to the edge. And then turn around and look. Yep. And then the top of your transfers, same thing. Push it right up to the top of the transfers. Turn around and look. Yep. Pretty close. And also when you're looking at the shape of your ports, same concept. You can take your piston, I don't know, it's hard to see in there, but I widened the exhaust some. So I didn't touch the top much, other than the cast itself was a little bit off, so I tried to get the profile of the top more even. You can see where it's a little bit off, but it's a lot closer than it was, believe it or not. And again, to keep the blowdown in the range you want, if you raise the top of that exhaust, you're going to have to correspondingly change the top of the transfers. But anyway, using that piston and ring, you can sort of push it down through and take a look and see how symmetric the work is that you've done. It's an idea whether or not you got to do some more corrective action. This one here, it's good enough for what I want to do. You get into the debate about how much finish work you do on these things. I don't know. You can put a lot of time into doing finish work and not get a lot of results. So it's one of those, to coin a phrase that I actually introduced into this discussion, point of diminishing returns. Just make sure you're pretty symmetric. It'll be good enough. If you got your port timing right, it's going to run pretty good. Just to review, intake timing has been modified. Transfer timing has been modified. Therefore, the blowdown with the exhaust has been modified. The exhaust port has been widened. The intake really has not been widened, even though it looks bigger. That's just because I dropped it. One of the things when you're playing around with the intake, not so much in this series of saw, but you don't want your intake to get wider than your piston skirt on things like 372's. So that's another thing you can check. Put that piston right down in there and make sure you didn't take too much off. To those who are skeptical that working on the bottom of the transfers in here makes any difference, well, I'm going to leave you with this optic here. Here's a stock one. Now look at the cross-sectional area of that transfer. In particular, here, and then as it goes further down the stroke and the piston starts closing things off here. And that's when there's theoretically the most amount of compression in the bottom end trying to push the mixture up into the transfers. Okay, same situation. Sometimes pictures are worth 1,000 words, but that's why you do that. Well, I kind of got impatient, so I'm breaking down this 345. In order to get the cylinder off, I've got to take the handle off. We're going to do that right now, and that's real easy. One of the things I noticed, and the reason why I'm put the video camera on, this handle on the 345, it's freaking plastic. You believe that? Oh well, I'll have to decide if I want to leave it on there or not. It obviously did some work for somebody, but where this saw is going, I think that'll come off the skidder a couple times, and I don't know. But anyway, I'll break it down real fast and see what we got here. Well, here's the throttle rod and all that. Always forget this one right here. And once I get this apart, I'm going to clean things up a little bit. I've got the cylinders in that vibration ultrasonic cleaner with purple power cleaner. This stuff seems to work pretty good. Handle, anti-vibe, rings. Here's your bottom end. These things come apart so quick and so easy. That's why I like working on them. Not that I'm lazy, but guess what? I'm lazy. Well, that was interesting. These things are not even finger tight. I wonder if what happened to this poor saw was it loosened up and the whole cylinder backed off a little bit, and that's why it's stuck. Because it got an air leak between the bearing cap and the case. Because those aren't very tight at all. Well, if I don't get any commentary, I think I'm going to put that plastic handle and just use it. If it breaks, I'll put a steel one on. Hudzel and places like that can give you a metal handle for these things for a pretty good price. Yeah, look at that. Saw fried. Look inside there. See how wet it is? It had a terrible air leak is what happened. What if it has one of those plastic? Oh yeah, look at that. It's got one of those too. But that one's tight. The air leak in this saw was that bottom end in there. You know, one of the things I do on these bearing caps is I put them on a flat plate in like 400 grit sandpaper, because when they've been on for a while, the screws pull the corners down and it makes it harder for it to seal. So if I put it on a flat plate and a piece of sandpaper, what I've done is I've taken the high spots that were put in by flexing over a period of time, and gives it a better chance of sealing around these edges again. Take two. Cylinders and why people do what they do. That was a Husqvarna 345, and it had this cylinder arrangement on it. Basically this sits right down inside like that, the bearing cap is integrated right into the cylinder. And from a performance standpoint, boy, there isn't a lot you can do, because you cannot adjust compression. You can't take a base gasket out or easily drop the cylinder relative to the crankshaft, therefore increasing compression. And with those finger ports way down inside, it's pretty hard to work inside there as well. So about the only thing you can do on these things is, you know, maybe adjust intake port timing, possibly widen the exhaust, but you know, why? So the 350 uses the same plastic injection molded bottom of the case, but then it has this bearing cap, and then the cylinder goes on top of the bearing cap, as compared to having it in one integrated design, the homeowner style saws. As they come stock, they've got that little divider in there, and as the cylinder comes stock, it looks something like this. And I'm going to turn around so we can get to the light. I'm having trouble with the light here, but if you can see inside there, there's a divider inside that as well. I should pull the caps off, but basically there's a divider in the transfers, and this mates up with the bottom like that, and then it stacks on the plastic and gives you essentially what you have in this one piece. Well, going to a 350, you get larger displacement, therefore more power, and a more sophisticated porting arrangement, more power as well, because you can pull the caps off the sides of those standard 350s like this. It gives you easy access, or not only the intake and exhaust, but you can get to the transfers as well. I think I'm just going to more show than talk, but this is kind of like why people do what they do. That's a 346 versus the standard 350s. If you're going to put a 346 top end on one of these bearing caps, you need to lower that, and the reason is, see if I can make this work on camera. This basically blocks off a lot of the transfer port cross-sectional area. That's what you get with a standard 350 on a bearing cap. If you put one of those cylinders from a 346 right on the bearing cap, you end up with that. Gotta drop it. No choice. And then the old why people do what they do, if you modify the 350s the way I do, is I drop them all the way down like that. And it'll make more sense if I put a piston in there, because the piston also is a major player in all this. Hang on, let me get a piston. When you put a piston in there, it makes even more sense, because remember, the skirt of the piston is part of that equation. I got the other piston over there for the 346, but you'll get the idea. They're stock. There's a piston in there, so you can see how that skirt cutout plays a role with the piston on the cross-sectional area of the transfer, the lower transfer. And of course, remember, I've got that ground out, that divider taken out of mine, so that increases the cross-sectional area even more. And also now, when you consider piston in what I've modified, you can see that you get even more cross-sectional area because it's been radiused. See that? But also, when you look at it from the side, put the bearing cap in there. this section right here I cut down, which even increases that opening possibility even more. See it? So that's why you do what you do. So if I'm going to put the 346 cylinder on one of those bearing caps and not a standard 346 magnesium case, I've got to drop these. Otherwise, it's just an awful lot of restriction. Yeah, and then you figure if I put the piston in there, there's just not a lot of room for that air to go pushing through. So, now I've got a decision to make. Do I go back and grind on this 346 because I was trying to keep things stock? I wanted to see if I can match a stock 346 with my fugly 2 cylinder here. The blowdown is just about the same between these 2 cylinders. I just want to see whether or not I can get one of these goofy old 350's. Also, you see these on the 353's to run as good, if not better, than the 346. And I want to beat my Chinese fugly saw, Chinese fugly 350, which is a screamer. I'm going to attempt a solution to one of the Achilles heels of this series saw with these plastic clamped intake manifold boots. What I did is I used a die grinder to punch a hole, but then also mill some of the plastic away so I can set a screw through there. And I'm just going to try it, and I'm going to epoxy this top piece where that nut's epoxied on, and put some epoxy down in there where it's not likely to want to back out for now, but it'll be something that I can break loose if I have to. But there's an attempt to solve one of the Achilles heels should a person have one of these. The other solution is to spend $14 and get the new style boot with a steel clamp. But you know, I've got a pile of these. I want to see if I can make them work, make them last. So you know, it's $14 a pop. So I gave that 346 a little help. Cut those back a little bit. And again, on the bearing cap, I'm going to get rid of those, which even further restricts. And I just rounded those a little bit into the, you know, I don't like, you know, some people like to call knife edge. What I like to do, and I don't know if it makes a difference, is work the intake side. This is where the intake is. Just work that side so you get a little more charge on the back side first. Does that matter? I don't know. Until I get a dynamometer, I won't be able to quantify this as much as I like. And that's going to happen, guys. It's just a matter of time. Anyway, cylinders. Where we are right now, might put this together as a short video and post it, because I don't think 45 minutes worth of me talking is all that interesting to anybody. So we'll try to do this in 15-minute segments or less, I promise. A little bit of touch-up work on those too. They're about ready for crocus cloth. I use like 120 grit crocus cloth, and I take a strip, pull it through that port, and then just pull it back and forth. You know, and that tends to smooth things, but also tends to smooth things as air would flow. This stuff is like $9 a roll at Napa. Now these burrs, the same brand name, carbide burrs, they're pricey, but well, I'll tell you what, they're worth it. I've got a whole pile of them, and they cut clean. And if you keep your RPMs down, they don't load up. But tools don't have to be that expensive, and that's part of the point of this whole video series. Is stuff that any guy can do, not just a guy with a machine shop, but just a guy with some skills. It doesn't take long. Yeah, I don't think you have to go crazy with that. I think there's very quickly a point of diminishing returns. But using it kind of like a rope, pulling it through there, you can smooth things up pretty quickly. So yeah, I just sort of hit them quick. I'll put some more time into it just because that's what I do. I'm not going to waste time with the video, but anyway, suffice to say, gave a little bit of help to that 346 because it's going to go on a bearing cap. I think I'm going to close this video off and start building saws. I think the concept is there. The details are for each of you guys to do the research and discovery. Just want to kind of show that with some basic tools, that's the point of this whole series, that you can actually do quite a bit if you do a little bit of research and decide what it is you're trying to get to performance wise. Of course, do the research first, and once you understand a little bit about the basics, then these are just saw puzzles. Things that are fun to do. You know, some people build hot rods. These hot rods here, they save money because I don't have to buy oil. And trying to make these little 50cc saws run good saves my back. So anyway, bye for now. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but there's a couple of things you got to avoid when you're working on these. One is when you radius this back, like I've done, is you can't go too far on this side, otherwise you make that flange way thin. And the other is, as much as I'd like to make those nice and symmetric and square, remember you have a screw going back in there, and you got to leave the material for the threads. I could probably take more off of this side, but again, I get that concept of point of diminishing returns, and I think we're there. So I got things pretty much cleaned up. A little more to do on this to pick off the old gasket, but they got a bath in the kitchen sink. You know, I'm still conflicted on which cylinder to go with first. Do I go with this darn thing, Fugly 2? Or do I go with the smaller diameter, but supposedly more sophisticated 346? I don't know. I guess you'll just have to wait and see. I'll post this, and if I get comments, maybe that'll help me decide as I go along. But about ready to start building.